If you don't know me, I'm Alan Hutchison. I'm the test manager in London, and it's my very great privilege to be able to introduce Mr. James Lyndsay, who is here for Whopper this week from London. James has been in testing for about 20 years and is currently independent, working as a test architect and strategist. He's been a great resource to us in London, and I'm sure that we're all going to enjoy the talk today. One note is that this talk is going to be published on Google Video. So if you have any questions that deal with an internal or confidential matter, please hold them until the end of the talk. With that, Mr. James Lyndsay.
Thank you, Alan. Well, as Alan says, my name's James Lyndsay. I'm a test strategist. And that's kind of a nebulous thing to be. Somebody said to me the other day, how do you get to be a test strategist? And the only answer has to be, first you have to make up the title. Test strategy is about arriving at a plan. As a test strategist, I help people with how they plan, what they're going to plan, perhaps what they're not going to plan. And that leads me to a point where people ask me questions about what's going to happen in the future. Well, the thing about testers is they should be able to predict the future. It's one of the things that testers do. We predict what things should do, how they behave. We should be able to look into the future a little bit. So this talk is unlike just about every other talk I do. This talk is about some ideas about what the future of testing could be like. It's not an experience report, although it is based on my experience. I'd like you to take something away from this, and that's the idea of the possibilities that could happen in testing. The potential that testing has got, but also the problems that it suffers under. So one of the ways to look at the future is to have a look at the past. And I went back to maybe 10, 11 years ago when I was first consulting independently, and I thought to myself, what was going on at that point? This guy here was well known for carrying around large guns and blowing things up. This guy here was well known for being the governor of one of the largest states in the Union. Now, 10, 11 years on, what has changed? Well, this guy here is one of the governors of one of the largest states in the Union, and this guy blows things up. So the world has certainly changed, and lest we forget, 10 years ago, this was Google at Stanford. 1996. Lego brick model with, I think, 11 4-gig drives in it. The world has changed in the last 10 years. The world has changed. Has my job changed? Well, my job these days consists of talking to people about testing. I talk to people about their manual testing, their automated testing, their exploratory testing. I talk to people about their test techniques, their test methods, the things they're testing, the kind of problems they find, and I'm not convinced that very much has changed. Really confused by this. The world has changed around us, but we as testers perhaps have not changed. I don't know why that is, but I do know that there is pressure, there is tension building, there is a change coming. So let's have a look at some of the potential changes that are on the horizon. Well, here are the standards set. Increased complexity, everything's getting more complex. Reduced time to market, we have to ship very quickly. And finally, everything is getting faster and cheaper. And my personal reaction to these accepted, straightforward trends is these are rubbish. And I will refute them one by one, I hope. Is the world getting more complex? No. The world is not getting more complex. The world is getting simpler. Simpler like this. This is all the music I'm bringing with me for this long trip. Excuse me, pointing the mic. For this long trip, I've got 14 hours worth of music on a thing with 5 or 6 buttons on it. The world is getting simpler and simpler on the outside. Much, much simpler. That has a direct effect on us as testers. Simpler on the outside. The world's not getting more complicated. Reduced time to market is also a lie. We're not talking about reduced time to market, we're talking about 0 time to market. We can take web updates, we can take changes to my system software on this Mac, and they're shipped to me on my demand. Not at a point when a software company chooses to ship it to me, but right now, right when I want it. The change is made. Somebody has found a security hole. I get that particular fix on this thing. I use a web service. I have absolutely no control over their updates, when they do them, what they make and what they break. Reduced time to market misses the point. The point is 0 time to market. And finally, we've heard of Moore's Law. Everything should be getting faster and cheaper. Frustratingly, as a 30 words a minute typer, I'm still marginally faster than Microsoft Word. So things aren't getting faster. This laptop costs much the same as the last laptop. And that costs much the same as the last desktop I spent money on. And again, we're going back 10 years or so. Is everything getting cheaper? No. What's happening is things are getting more powerful. So let's have a look at these pressures. Simplicity. 0 time to market. Increased power. What do we find? Well, we find that the world is changing and pushing us in ways that perhaps we weren't expecting. We're being pushed towards commoditization and ubiquity. Let me give you some examples. This is my bank. I want information from my bank at any time of the day or night. I can get information from my bank at any time of the day or night. I can ring them up. I can surf their website. I've got multiple points of entry. I've got any time to choose. What I want is the information, and I want it all the time, whether I'm in America, whether I'm in Europe, the various different things I'm surfing through. I want ubiquity. Always want my information. This is, or rather was, my phone. What do I want from my phone? I want it to work when I'm out here in California. I want it to work when I'm in London. I want it to work when I'm at my mother's in Somerset and the signal is poor. It works everywhere I go in the world. More than that, I can take the SIM out, stick it into any other phone, and that will also work anywhere in the world and pretend that it's my phone. I want ubiquity. If I can take the SIM out, change it round, I also want commodity. Don't care what the phone is. I just want to be able to get hold of my phone numbers. Don't care how I talk to the bank. I just want to get at my information. Here's a picture of a Mac Mini. Now, we talked about how things get more powerful. I've got one of these at home. In fact, I won't open it up. I've got one of these in my bag here. It's a more powerful Unix server than the Unix server I first trained on when I first worked in the city 12 years ago. It is a more powerful Unix server. What's more, it's also a commodity. It's very cheap. I can shift information in and out of it. If it goes wrong, I'm not really bothered. I buy another one, slot it into the same place, put the backup back on. I don't care. So what's happening to us in testing? We're being pressured by greatly increased power, an urge for ubiquity. Wherever we want to get hold of our data, we get hold of it. Ubiquitous access and commoditization. We don't really care how we get that access. So those are trends. Those are pushing us as testers. Sometimes they're helping us. Sometimes they're hindering us. And those pressures are what are building up into the tension that I think we see in testing and the reason why I think there's a change coming. One of the reasons I'm in testing. is that it's got extraordinary potential, remarkable potential. As with many testers, when I first started testing, I was wondering what to do. I knew a little bit about coding. I found it fascinating. I found that I was digging deep into it. I found that I loved it because it was so difficult, so interesting, so varied. Testing has got such huge potential. One of the reasons it's got such potential is because of the breadth of requirement that it serves. Lots of different people get lots of different things from testing. Testing as a service. I'll only have as much testing as I want. That and no more. I'll test for 2 weeks. I'll find the bugs, we'll gamble on a release. Testing as a standard. It must be tested to this particular approach. It's quite different ways of working, quite different sets of information come out of it, quite different results for the business that is asking for it. I taught a class yesterday. In the class I said, how many people here are engaged in making software? It's Silicon Valley. Out of 12 people, 12 arms went up. I also work in companies that make software, that buy software. If I did the same class in the City of London, I'd say, how many of you are engaged in making software? I'd see no arms. I'd see 12 arms on people buying software. Testing is quite different at these two ends of the scales. It supplies different information to different groups. Sometimes we're testing just the software, just a tiny part. Sometimes we're testing the system. Testing's got potential because it talks to so many people across so many different elements of a business, elements of an organization. It's one of the reasons testing has huge potential. Some ways to see testing. I see it as a lab, scientific lab filled with exploration and rigor, interesting kit, new ideas, new discoveries. That's one way to see testing. Some testing works that way. Another way to see testing is as a kitchen. People making things that are good, with tools they expect to use, with approaches they expect to use, to accepted standards of quality, and they're usually making them at speed and on requirement. Two different ways of working with testing, two different ways of seeing testing. I often see testing as something akin to journalism. The production of information, the discovery of information. And sometimes that journalism is like working on the local paper. All we're producing is information that basically says, all's well, nothing big has changed, there's nothing important that has broken, everything is fine. Other times I see testing as investigative journalism. We dug into this. It looked good. We found that it was rotten to the core. Different ways of approaching testing, different things that testing can do, different ways of seeing testing. And for me, this adds up into this idea that testing is strategic. One of the reasons that I'm a test strategist. Testing is strategic. It produces extraordinary information. That information can't be got hold of unless it goes to the customers, unless it goes and gets out into the real world. It produces extraordinary and unfindable information in an otherwise impossible timescale. That's the great value and potential of testing. But testing has another, perhaps darker potential. There is a split in methodology, a split in ideas, something that should be used by all projects as a pair. Not as a this works, this doesn't, but as a pair. I'm talking about the difference between highly scripted approaches and highly exploratory approaches. That split appears to be widening to me. And I think it's widening for a reason. And I think whereas the reason is good, the idea of using one or the other is clearly poor. Let me talk to you about why I think that split is occurring. Here we have diagram 1 of software testing, or at least the first half of diagram 1 of software testing. This expresses stuff that I expect. Outside, things I don't expect. The other half of diagram 1, things I get. These things I get, these things I didn't get. and there are overlaps in this diagram. Now, out here are things I didn't want and things I didn't get. So we'll leave that one well alone. Inside here, things I expected and that I also got. That's important. It's useful. It means that we did some work and we got some value from it. The other areas are interesting for testing too. Over here, we've got things we expected that we didn't get. Clearly, if you expected something, you didn't get it, there's a value issue here. You paid for something, you asked for something, you put some work into something, you didn't get it. That's a value issue. And if you start by moving through your expectations, then you'll find out a lot about value. Value that's missing, value that you've got. But it doesn't tell you much about this part of the diagram. If you scan your deliverable, it'll tell you about what you've got. Some of which you expect, some of which you don't expect. Stuff you don't expect. Is it valuable? We don't know. Is it risky? We don't know. It needs a little bit more assessment. So as you scan through your deliverable, what you find out is risk. Things that you should know a little bit more about before you let them happen. Scan through your expectations, find out about value. Scan through your deliverable, you find out about risk. Those two things should be used together so that you can find out about risk and value for your overall effort. But the problem is, you can't deal with your deliverable until you get it. A lot of testing work you can and should do early. And it pushes further and further and further upstream in some senses. However, with deliverable work, you can't do it early. You don't have anything to focus on. So all this early work focuses only on one half of this diagram. And I think that's one of the reasons why this split is turning up. So we've looked at some of the pressures on testing, and we've looked at a potential split in testing. Let's look at some of the assets testing has. This is a photograph of a building in London. In 1846, Mr. Kirkcaldy built the Kirkcaldy Testing Works, which was a load testing laboratory. Thus, London is the heart of load testing, as far as I can tell. And this load testing laboratory could go up to a load of 400 tons. The beam is still in place. I like it because of this note in the top of the window. Facts, not opinions. This talk, of course, is opinion-based, so value it as you wish, but facts, not opinions. That's what we deal with as testers. And we can get a lot more facts out of the kit we're working with by having a look at the various assets we've got to work with. Let's have a look at some of the toys and technologies that have arisen in the last 10 years or so, or are bubbling around us right now. Test harnesses, unit testing. There's an increased emphasis on unit testing. Partly this is because of that shift upstream and downstream. There are unit testing tools. There are tools that support testing within the coding process. Tools like Parasoft and AsiaSTAR. Great tools out there, and also great processes, things like test-driven development. Not that that's a test technique, but it produces a different kind of code. So a lot more testing going on a lot earlier. Finding out about code coverage. Certain tools are now built into the development environments of particular operating systems to tell you about code coverage, to automate your unit tests. Within the operating systems themselves, we're starting to see more potential for automated testing, more potential for automation, some scripted languages. We're starting to see these turn up to bring testing within the realm of testers who up to now haven't coded. Simple things to use, very powerful things to use, important tools for testers. We're seeing tools that help you test, that help you design your tests. There's a tool called CaseMaker from Deas and Hilterscheld. CaseMaker will work through equivalence class partitions, boundary value analysis, various other bits and pieces, combine them all in a combinatorial way, and produce tests that would generally take a test analyst quite a lot of time to produce and provide requirements link back. There are tools out there that help you design tests. So as testers, we're getting better code. We can perhaps get involved earlier on. We're able to do more testing. We're able to design our tests more easily and more effectively. Got a whole new world of emulation. I started to use emulators maybe 5 or 6 years ago. We're starting to see a lot more emulators turning up. Emulators allow you to do so much with a testing environment. Sometimes you get bugs that are associated with the emulator, but most of the time, those emulators are hugely important to being able to vary the tests you're doing, to be able to replay the tests you're doing. The power of being able to go to a coder and say, well, doesn't your work in your environment? Here is an environment in which it does work. And give them a disk with that machine captured on it. The power of being able to go to somebody and say, here is a machine in a state that is about to fail. Your software is about to fail here. You can replay it. Loads of power there in emulation. We've all come across capture replay tools. Capture replay tools are fine. We understand capture replay tools. We understand some of their problems. But capture and replay perhaps aren't the most interesting tools to use. They are problematic. One of the things that is coming up now are capture monitor tools. Tools that allow you to capture what's going on, monitor it in a whole bunch of different ways. To be able to rewind what the system has done, not just as an emulator, but to be able to look back over log files, synchronize those with test events. Capture and monitor tools. Tools that you can use to slow down your observation. And finally, we've got a whole new raft of tools. In particular, I'm thinking of Holodeck here, which modify the environment you're working on. How do you run out of memory on a PC? Do you take memory out? Do you run another program to reduce the memory? Possibly. Or you could get hold of a Holodeck license. And Holodeck allows you to reduce the amount of memory in the PC, to reduce the network access, to turn DLLs off. It allows you to ask the program to behave as if the disk is full. It's an extraordinary tool to help testers test what they want to test quickly and easily. So we have a whole bunch of tools out there for testers. A lot of big changes have come in over the last few years. Got a change in methodologies as well. I've talked already about test-first design. Not a design technique, not a test technique, a design technique, but does produce quite different code qualitatively, based on my experience. Test produced by a TDD team is different. It has different kinds of bugs in it. Much more to do with emergent behaviors, problems in integration, than with direct coding problems or design problems. Very different to test under this methodology. Evolutionary delivery, so that we're releasing frequently. We're releasing into a test team maybe every couple of weeks, maybe more frequently than that. Do we repeat all our testing? No, we don't. Do we leave it all out? No, we don't. We've got some decisions to make. There are new methodologies turning up. Harry Robinson, who works here at Google, is one of the proponents of model-based testing. One of the clearest ideas of model-based testing is the sense that there's an unlimited number of tests. Well, we all as testers know there are an unlimited number of tests. Harry and others have found a way of getting at the unlimited number of tests. So testing is like turning on a tap, not filling up a bucket. That's a new way of testing. Finally, we are seeing more testing integrated into the software lifecycle. We've seen some stuff early on in unit testing. We're seeing things later on in monitoring, testing in a live system. The idea of overall cost of ownership through the life of a system is interesting to businesses, and testers are being used throughout that. And we can see that trend in the way that the tools companies are changing their presentation to the marketplace. And finally, we've got some tools that enable us to do different things as testers. Workflow tools. We've all seen them as bug trackers. Workflow tools can change the way we work as testers because they make certain elements of management quite obsolete. If you've got a workflow tool, you can flow bugs into your developers, you can flow fixes back out, you can put that in together with a flow of tests that are likely and useful to do, and prioritization can happen on a quite different level. You're no longer, as a test manager, trying to pick and choose and plan which test to do next. Now you've got a workflow tool, you know what tests are there. They flow in, they flow out. So testing becomes like a pipe rather than like a postage service. Things flow through testing, the sense of momentum, rather than the sense of, oh, here we are, we've been landed with a whole bunch of tests. Web services are turning up, allowing us to cobble together tools and ideas and information sources, allowing us to put things together, not just in a live environment, but also in our test environment. All these pressures on testing also can help testing. Web services introduce huge complexities to testing, yes, but they also introduce tremendous potential. And over the last few years, I've seen companies slowly starting to embrace this. I can see this going much further. Collaborative documentation. Let's get away from requirements documents held in Word and being obsolete from the moment they're created to requirements held in collaborative documentation tools, where we can see all sorts of information changing as the system changes, where it changes in the way that code changes. It's not to say we get away from change control. It's to say that we can see a live document rather than a dead document. And finally, we're at a state where we can combine some of the web things, we can combine the speed of what we're able to harness and start using genuinely real-time metrics, which once again changes the way that testing works. It's hard to ever feel that somebody has not told you about a problem if you've seen their metrics at the moment they've posted them. If you've seen their metrics straight after they've done the test. The testers feel they own what's going on as real-time metrics ramp up. I finished this test, watch this change. Real-time metrics, very useful when you get them working. And now they're tremendously easy to get working. And they start to become ambient. They start to become part of the scenery. A screen sat on top of somebody's cube with a graph on that changes during the day, during the week, something that has got colors on it. You maybe can't go up to it and interpret its finest detail, but from the other side of the office, you can see how well testing is going and how well it isn't going. Suddenly, testing is integrated. It's not as obscure as it can be in some organizations. So that's the situation we find ourselves in. We've got pressures on testing. Those pressures on testing come from simplicity. They come from zero time to market. They come from the extraordinary power that we're now able to bring to bear on our testing problems. And we've got different ways of thinking about testing. Thinking about testing as an information source. Extraordinary information being able to be brought out of the testing effort in hardly any time, perhaps. We can find terrific information of genuinely strategic importance. And we can start to use different tools and work on those tools to get lots of changes happening in our organizations. Now, that's the end of an analysis of, if you like, what is happening in testing at the moment. But there's a second step to this. What futures could we achieve as testers? Because we have not changed much in the last 10 years. Or at least I've not seen much change. Perhaps it's the position I'm working in. Perhaps ideas are coming in testing from lots of different sources. So you'll all have your own ideas as to what may happen in testing, what may happen in your jobs in the future. Let me give you a little bit of perspective from my point of view about what may happen in the future. By all means, disagree with this. But if you do disagree, I'd like to hear from you some of your perspective so that I can learn. What do I think? I think that we've all got to deal with these pressures. But I think that they're also creating lots of things for us to do. They're also creating lots of opportunities for us to do the things that they require. With simplicity comes things like web services to allow us to bolt things together. Ubiquity and commoditization isn't just happening to the outside world, it's happening to testing as well. We're able to now abstract some of our tests, reuse some of our tests, make our tests commodities, if you like. Now that is having a problem, or creating a problem, and it's creating a problem that is a problem to some countries and not to other countries. Because as we commoditize our tests, we're able to send them elsewhere. And testers, that's a little bit of your jobs that get sent somewhere else. To people who can do the same job because you've commoditized the testing. Is the solution to that to not commoditize the testing? Nope, the pressure is to commoditize. This will happen. A lot of testing work is already outsourced because it's abstracted. This generally makes it better testing. Abstracted testing is repeatable, effective, can work extremely well, but it can also be outsourced. And that pushes that testing effort upstream. We can do more and more testing early. We can change the quality of code that is happening. And that is one half of testing. But the other half of testing is concentrating on something different. All this push upstream looks at the side of testing which is to do with what is expected. But all the testing that looks at what has been delivered and assesses it for risk, that's still in the same place. And that's still now very close to the release date. So it may well have to overlap into live. This downstream testing is looking at things like emergent behaviors, problems that nobody expected, surprises that nobody thought they'd see, not mistakes in design, not mistakes in coding, emergent properties. It's also looking at resilience. How well will this work in the vast number of different circumstances we have to put an object into? Can we put something into the real world, or will it only work in a test lab? And I think our solution to that is to become tooled up. A fool with a tool is still a fool, and we all know that acronym, even if some of us can't say it. But a tester without a tool is going to look increasingly foolish. I've done a lot of exploratory testing. I've done a lot of load testing. I've generally used tools for the load testing and my hands for manual testing. More and more, I'm using tools for the whole thing. You'll always have your hands on the keyboard. You'll always have your hands on the tests that you're doing. But increasingly, you're going to need to use a tool to be an effective tester, rather than simply behave as a user behaves through the simple interfaces that the user has. You're going to have to take a tool and work through the more complex interfaces that are available to testers, because those are the complex interfaces that are available to all the other players in the game that are interacting with your software who aren't the users. So that's what I think about the future of software testing. And I think that it's a good future, a positive future. I think it's a bright future. And I look forward to taking part in it. Is it a different future? I think it's radically different. It's a tremendously different idea to be working to short timescales with such complex things. We can't use what we've used before. We have to integrate ourselves with other parts of the process, and we're going to be using a lot more tools. Is it radically different? Yes, I think so. But is the future that I've got in my head achievable? Is the future that you've got in your head achievable? How do we get there? There is pressure on us to change. If we don't, as testers, change, we're liable to be left for a while. Potentially left behind and out of a job. So, my question then to you testers is, what do you fancy doing? Do you fancy an evolution, or do you want a revolution? And that's my question to you. If there are any questions for me, that would be great. More information, from a long way up. More information, contact me there. Thank you very much. Questions? Then we're done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.